Right, hey guys, how are we doing? Back with another video from Hamon Beta, and today we are checking out Debunking Araki Forgot Extras numero 8, which is number 8 in Spanish.
Hamon the beat.
Let's get right into this bad boy.
Welcome back to another Debunking Araki Forgot, where I answer JoJo fan questions that I haven't already covered. I've been on a roll with videos lately, so I've been able to very quickly put together another list for this video.
Oh, rules. Just in case. Majority of you are aware, but no. So I can already see we've got the main guy, well, one of the guys from Steel Ball Run here. So, we go up through the video. As soon as it gets past Stone Ocean, starts doing Steel Ball Run onwards, we're skipping and potentially stopping. Okay.
Something I've been noticing lately is a lot of people bringing up topics that I've already covered before. So I would suggest to make sure you've seen the previous videos to
I would suggest paying attention.
see if I already went over something, particularly in the main videos, which go over the most common questions for each part.
Steel Ball Run, I have seen, right? You can pre-order the manga for next year. So, volumes of it are coming out next year. So, potentially next year, I can cover Part 7 stuff. We'll see.
But what I would like to do here is go back to a couple already covered topics to sort of reinforce or expand on what I said before with some better clarification.
Okay.
For now, though, let's get into the first topic.
Let's do it.
The first question deals with Part 2. This question asks how Joseph was able to use the empty shot glasses to redirect Straizo's Space Ripper stinging eyes.
Why do people care? But okay, go on.
When later Caesar
I remember that being so cool.
tells us that Hamon only works on living things. For this one, I honestly have to wonder how someone can be confused like this. Caesar's line here isn't saying that no non-organic material can conduct Hamon. I actually talked about this line all the way back in my first debunking video. Here, Caesar is specifically talking about not being able to melt and destroy the Pillar Men with Hamon. Obviously, that isn't possible while in their rock form, where they're shown to be immune to sunlight and UV rays. They may be able to break or damage the rock, as seen with Zeppeli in Part 1, but that's not what's being talked about here. For this question, the subject matter is a bit different since we're talking about whether the glass can channel Hamon. We've actually seen many instances of non-living things being able to conduct Hamon, like Jonathan's sword Pluck. As Straizo explained in Part 1, non-organic material can conduct Hamon as long as contact is maintained. Joseph is obviously maintaining
He's holding the glass.
contact with the shot glasses by holding them, and so they are able to channel Hamon.
Wow.
Another Part 2 question.
Easy, easy, pow pow.
They ask how SEDC was able to predict what Joseph was going to say, despite never being shown to be able to do this elsewhere. Of course, as we all know, SEDC is doing what Joseph normally does here. However, I think this person is assuming that Joseph specifically is the only one to be able to do this, and for whatever reason, SEDC shouldn't. I think this stems from a common misunderstanding when it comes to Joseph's predictions. Some people have said that Joseph's predictions actually come from his early use of Hermit Purple. Now, you might be thinking that Joseph didn't have access to the stand at this point, but there is something to support that. Araki said in the Jojonium Volume 9 interview that Hermit Purple is an expression of Hamon, and that Joseph did have access to it back then in some capacity, just without knowing.
Oh,
So
wow,
if
okay.
Joseph and the others were to go back in time, they would see Hermit Purple wrapped around young Joseph.
Oh, because then they'd be able to see the stands and stuff. Ooh, alright.
Now this is an interesting idea which ties into Araki's statements about the connection between stands and Hamon, but it doesn't really have anything to do with his predictions. Joseph is able to predict these things simply because he is extremely observant.
I was a bit worried it was getting into it, because I remember, because I've read the first, 2 or 3 chapters of Steel Ball Run online, and then, so I was worried he was going into... But yeah, so I do know how Steel Ball Run starts and that.
This was demonstrated in the restaurant scene, when Joseph
the-
walked through his deduction process for
ripple.
how he was able to predict what the gangster would do. So for SEDC, it's the same thing. He's observant like Joseph, which is how he's able to see through a lot of Joseph's tricks in that battle. This next question asks, why did Straizo and Santana not have any unique vampire abilities when, for example, Dio had freezing, Cars had blades, SCDC had boiling blood, and Wemu had wind. However, I don't think it's really the case that they didn't have any powers. The Pillarmen's abilities granted to them by the Stone Mask let them greatly manipulate their bodies, and like the other three, Santana actually did have powers like this, which we saw with his ability to squeeze through tight spaces and into the bodies of others, as well as creating a cage using his own bones.
Yeah, bit weird.
Vampires have a similar amount of control over their bodies, although seemingly less so than the Pillarmen. Keep in mind, though, that these powers aren't something just given to them. They have to train their bodies and then end up developing these techniques. Dio experimented with the limitations of this, which is how he came up with things like freezing and the Space Ripper Stingy Eyes.
Which I think's cool, because the amount of anime where, like, people get a power up and then all of a sudden they just know straight away how to do stuff. I like this whole thing, like, Dio messed about and, like, tried to figure out stuff before being able to do it. That makes more sense.
And Straizo actually did have access to the Stingy Eyes, so that is an example.
I'm sorry, and for JoJo's being as wacky as it is, to be one of the few animes that actually does that, that's something.
Of him using a vampire power. He was also shown to have a great degree of control over his body parts, so I really don't see how Straizo is different from the others in this regard. This next one asks, how was Caesar able to kill Mark with Hamon? Now, I don't exactly understand this question since it was never the case that human beings are immune to Hamon. We have seen that Hamon is capable of passing harmlessly through living things, but if Hamon is concentrated, it actually can cause damage. First of all, we see that humans can be knocked out by being zapped with Hamon, and in some cases, strong enough Hamon could even stop a person's heart. So it's not the case that Mark would be unable to be killed by Hamon, which is precisely what happened. The next person asks how Lisa Lisa's scarf was able to conduct Hamon, when earlier we saw that Straizo's identical scarf was used to repel Hamon. This person seems to not fully understand what the scarf is. This special scarf was created from the dried fibers of thousands of beetles. It conducts 100% of the Hamon it receives. Straizo compares it to a lightning rod. So while it can be used to conduct Hamon as an attack, it can also completely absorb Hamon as a defense, which is what Straizo does. This next person asks a question I've seen quite a bit. Why didn't Jotaro inherit Hamon from Joseph, like how Joseph inherited Hamon from Jonathan? I actually very briefly covered this topic before in a previous video, except I was talking about why George II didn't inherit any. Despite how common this question is, I think the answer is actually extremely simple. He just didn't inherit it. In the same way that George II didn't inherit it from Jonathan, and that Holly or Josuke didn't inherit it from Joseph. People are different and their potential expresses itself in different ways.
Well, in real life, sometimes things get passed down generations, don't they? You know, sometimes you don't get certain things from relatives, but then it's the next generation that it, you know.
So while Joseph or Caesar may have potential that manifests earlier in their life with Hamon, that isn't the case for everyone. It was said that George did have potential, but just never received proper Hamon training, so Jotaro could be viewed in the same way, and his strong fighting spirit was later instead fully realized with the use of Star Platinum. This next one deals with the fight with Dark Blue Moon. There was a scene early on when Jotaro claimed he could spot stand users since a blood vessel appears on their nose when they inhale cigarette smoke. This was a trick by Jotaro to expose the captain as a stand user, since he touched his nose, showing he knew what a stand was. Of course, the whole blood vessel thing was just made up by Jotaro, but this comment asks why Avdol fell for the trick and touched his nose, when his stand Magician's Red has fire powers and Avdol would have been inhaling smoke all the time. There's a few things wrong with this. Jotaro does specify cigarette smoke, not just any smoke. However, more importantly, it's made clear that this hypothetical blood vessel needs to be touched to be felt, which is why everyone tried touching their nose. Even if Avdol had been inhaling smoke, he wouldn't have known unless he touched his nose. However, even more importantly than that is the fact that Avdol's stand creates stand fire, not actual fire, and therefore he wouldn't be inhaling smoke all the time. One topic I've seen a lot is confusion surrounding Whole Horse's stand Emperor. Many say that it is a bound stand, like Anubis or Toth, a stand tied to a physical object that even non-stand users can see. They say the Araki forgot here is that despite this, people aren't able to see it. I would sort of think the fact that people can't see it is an answer to the question already, because Emperor is not a bound stand. It was never said that Emperor was bound, or that anyone who isn't a stand user can see it, and none do. The fact that we had scenes pointing this fact out is proof enough, but even back in Emperor's first introduction, we see the stand being summoned and phasing through Whole Horse's hand.
Well, there you go. So, yeah, he's not like he's pulling it out of his pocket or anything. Like, Anubis' sword is constantly around as a sword, isn't it?
Bound stand would be unable to do. We also see Whole Horse able to unsummon his bullets to make them disappear in midair, which is how he saves himself from being shot. If we look at bound stands in the series, they can't be summoned and unsummoned. They exist physically at all times. There seems to be a misconception that any stand that looks like an object is bound, when really stands can take any shape or size, and whether they're bound or not is an entirely different criteria. This next person claims that Indul's stand Geb had the ability to dehydrate and drown people, but that this was never seen again. Now, the drowning I feel is kind of self-explanatory. Geb takes the form of water, and the man's mouth was full of water, which of course was actually Geb drowning him. As for the dehydration though, this never happened. At no point did Geb ever dehydrate anyone.
Right.
What this person may be thinking of is the other Speedwagon agent who appeared to be asking for water. However, as anyone who read this would know, he was actually trying to warn them to stay away from the water, after which he is killed by Geb.
Right,
I assume this person thinks that because the man looked thirsty, that Geb dehydrated him, when really that would be as a result of him being stranded in the desert. I think this might also stem from a misunderstanding of Geb that I've seen before, that it controls already existing bodies of water similar to Aqua Necklace, and that it removed water from the Speedwagon agent using that. However, this is not how the stand works. It isn't made of pre-existing water, it is a stand with the properties of water. Something I've wanted to cover for a while now, but I've never been able to fit into a video, is the common idea that Jotaro's time stop has some kind of effect on his heart. This isn't really people claiming there's a plot hole or Araki forgot, but regardless, it's one of the most common pieces of misinformation I've seen in the JoJo series. Through just a basic search, you can see people claiming that Jotaro's heart goes through some kind of strain or is outright stopped during stop time, and that this was the cause for his decreased time stop in later parts. You can find multiple people online claiming this was something directly stated in the manga or by Araki. However, this is not the case. Across the manga, anime, supplemental materials, and any interviews with Araki, it has never been said that Jotaro's heart is affected by time stop in any way, and nothing even similar to this is true.
I think, where's that come from then? I suppose online, and it just takes one person to like be like, hey, and then someone goes, oh really? And then they don't actually look into it, and then the conversation keeps going, and then people read it, and then it's like, spreading of the misinformation!
The only reason for Jotaro's time stop decreasing was directly stated in the manga, that it is due to it not being continuously used. For an example of this being said, take a look at this Reddit exchange. Here someone claims that Jotaro said his heart is strained by time stop, which is completely untrue. Then someone follows up by saying that this was the stated reason for Star Platinum's durability decreasing from A to E in Part 6. This is also completely untrue.
Wow.
Then someone correctly points out that this is not the case, and it is just a common fan theory. Finally, this last person responds by reiterating that it was confirmed in Part 6, taking the second comment completely at face value while actually knowing nothing. To make matters worse, this last comment gets more upvotes just by being confidently wrong, rather than the actually correct comment. I have no clue when exactly this idea started, and it's so widespread that I think it would be practically impossible to find.
Wow.
Although I have a suspicion that it originally stems from people mixing Jotaro's ability up with the one of the character Rolo in Code Geass, who has the ability to stop time for other people, with the drawback of his heart stopping while using it.
Yeah, maybe.
Not directly related to the topic of this video, I do think this is important to cover, since spreading misinformation like this is exactly what leads to the kind of topics I respond to in these videos.
I gotta say, I really like this still of Star Platinum here. Looks really, really cool. Boss.
Another similar piece of misinformation is the idea of Star Platinum being a reincarnation of Jonathan. This one has even tied into Araki Forgot topics before, with some saying Jonathan's stand shouldn't be able to exist since he was really reborn as Star Platinum. This idea is completely unfounded, despite countless people continuing to say it. Many people point to a moment in part 1, when Jonathan says that if he dies, his ghost will haunt Dio as evidence that Jonathan returned to Star Platinum.
I mean,
you could even find
he's got the shoulder pads as well, you know, so I could see why some people would think it.
Clickbait articles online directly mentioning this piece of dialogue as proof of the theory. However, the screenshot people use of this is completely fabricated. Jonathan doesn't actually say this in the manga or anime, and this picture was most likely created just to support this idea. This next question deals with part 4.
It's funny how far people will go in it, for no reason whatsoever. It's like, they'll come up with like a little theory or a moment, and then to back it up, they go, ooh, let's take the subtitles off and put my own to back up that, and then people read that and like, oh, it's like... So bizarre. So bizarre.
That's why Akira didn't use Red Hot Chili Pepper to help search for Kira, since we saw in Thus Spoke Shibe Rohan that he became friendly towards the other characters. Well, first I'd like to point out that the Rohan chapter that Akira appears in, Mutsukabe Hill, takes place about 13 years after Part 4. As for in Part 4 itself, Akira was being kept in prison on a 3-year sentence and was too scared to leave out of fear of retribution from Jotaro.
Right.
I think the most important thing here, though, is the state of his stand. After it was thrown into the water by Josuke, it was torn to pieces and its appearance changed drastically, and seemed to stay that way, at least temporarily. Koichi's narration comments that his stand is a mess, making him no longer a problem. So he is seemingly unable to freely traverse the power lines like he could before.
Right, okay.
This next one asks how Josuke was able to change the letters on the lottery ticket to something other than what it was originally. I really don't know how someone can ask this when we've seen countless examples throughout the part of Josuke fixing things incorrectly. Of course, there's the very early moments of him messing up the bully's face and Jotaro's hat, and then later the furniture and fusing Angelo to a rock.
With the rock, yeah.
We also see him do things like fix the ground into a raised up wall. So he just did the same thing here, manipulating the ink to be fixed into a different state. This question is one I've seen for a long time, but I somehow never ended up covering it. Some people have asked why when Kira was disguised as Kozaku, he didn't have to use special makeup to maintain his appearance, when otherwise people under Cinderella's ability had to do it, like Yukiko. However, it was shown that this is not a completely rigid limitation of her stand. All of the rules Aya applied to her customers only existed to fulfill her wish to act as their fairy godmother. As we saw at the end of the arc, Aya is able to reverse or maintain these changes without the use of makeup. So Kira wouldn't have to be stuck with this after he threatened Aya into altering his appearance. This next one asks how Koichi was able to appear in the Cheap Trick arc when he was simultaneously trapped in the paper by Enigma. This person is correct in recognizing that these arcs take place crossing over with each other. However, I don't see how this would result in this kind of confusion. Even in the anime, which makes the arcs overlap, Koichi doesn't appear at Rohan's house until after he had already been freed from the paper. So it's presented really clearly here. The beginning parts of the Cheap Trick arc happened during the previous arcs, and Koichi's appearance happens after those arcs have ended. One of the most common questions I've seen asks how Kira was able to control the air bubbles of Stray Cat, when Stray Cat is a separate stand and Kira has never been shown to be able to control the direction of things his bombs are implanted in. People seem to be overcomplicating this, since the answer is very simple. Kira trained Stray Cat to control the direction of the shots on his command. This is why he was repeatedly visiting the plant in the attic and giving it cat food. This next question deals with the spin-off story Dead Man's Questions following the ghost of Yoshikage Kira.
Oh. Didn't know this was or did I? Because I do recognize this picture. Okay.
This person asks why Kira needed
Because there's another spin-off of 5 as well. Is this official? Or...
to buy a ticket to ride on the train when he's a ghost. First of all, they sort of go on to answer their own question here by pointing out that as a ghost, Kira needs to avoid touching people or his body will be damaged. But to this they ask why he doesn't just stand up on the train. I really don't see how this makes sense. First of all, Kira isn't riding on the subway here. This is a long-distance bullet train, not really the kind of train that you stand up on. Of course, he doesn't really need to sit necessarily, but I think he's actually more at risk standing in the cramped aisle that someone could walk down rather than reserving a seat for himself. As for why he needs to get a ticket at all, we need to remember that ghosts in this story abide by a certain set of rules. Kira cannot enter into places that he isn't invited, so you could argue that he wouldn't even be able to board the train without having a ticket.
That's interesting.
Finally, though, I think this person misses the most...
It's kind of like how like vampires aren't allowed in unless you invite them in kind of thing, so kind of same spirity thing. That's cool, so that you can't go somewhere unless invited, da-da-da-da. So having a ticket would grant you entry, so that makes sense. I like that.
Important part of this. Kira got the seat on the train because he wanted to. He likes to enjoy his time and watch outside the window undisturbed. It's the same reason he decided to take the train instead of just walking. He does these things to make it easier on himself. Now for a part 5
simple
question.
life. A
This
simple
person
death.
asks how in the babyface fight, Giorno was able to make his hand return to him when this isn't something his ability can do. However, this is something Giorno can do. In fact, it's one of the first things that we ever see Giorno do with his ability, which is that his creations return to him. Early on, we see that the frog returned to Giorno.
Yep.
Giorno imbued the bike with life to turn it into a hand, and had that creation returned to him. Now, another thing I've already gone over is the
my
confusion
goodness, here we
surrounding the
go.
stand King Crimson. I addressed this in my main Part 5 video, and went into much more detail in my full video on the stand.
So you could do the actual figured out how King Crimson worked by watching this video, or if you want a funny approach, you could watch Viva Reverie's Giorno. Is it Giorno? Yeah, Giorno explains King Crimson, which is hilarious. But yeah, it's out there. It's out there.
However, not everyone watched that video, so I still get a lot of
I did.
comments confused about it. So I'd like to just focus on a few points to make those more clear. The main question I still see raised about the stand is how Diavolo is seemingly able to interact with things during a skip, despite it being stated that he cannot interact. I already answered this before, but it apparently isn't clear enough. When Diavolo looks at Epitaph, he is shown a 10-second broadcast of the future. The things shown are fated to happen no matter what. When Diavolo skips time, his body becomes exempt from fate, and he can move freely. However, this only applies to him and
yeah.
nobody
Everything
else's
else is
fate
still
able to
affected.
be changed. But imagine if Diavolo were originally fated to do an action, which would then result in someone or something else being affected.
It would
If
still
Diavolo
happen.
skips time, just because his actions are overwritten, doesn't mean that the fate of the other people would be changed. So the results of those original actions still remain
Still happen,
regardless. This is how he was able to move Trish out of the elevator, or how he impaled Narancia on the bars. He was originally fated to do those things, and then skipped time to confuse his enemies while still keeping the results. One more specific instance I've seen a ton of comments about is his fight with Risotto. At the end of the battle, Risotto manipulated Aerosmith to shoot Diavolo, but Diavolo skipped time and the bullets went through him. A lot of people have asked how this is possible, when the bullet's fated path should have been to stay in Diavolo after they hit him. This is a huge misunderstanding of the scene, since Risotto's intention was actually to kill them both. This was his last-ditch effort to kill Diavolo while also sacrificing himself. The bullet's original fated path was to pierce through and kill Diavolo, then continue and kill Risotto. However, Diavolo skipped the first part, and the bullets continued along their path to only kill Risotto. This next one deals with the stand Notorious B.I.G. They ask how it's possible that the stand catches up to its targets, when it's said that the stand matches its target's speed, which would mean that it couldn't be fast enough to catch up. This is a result of a mistranslation. Here in the fan version, it says that it matches speed. However, if we check the official translation, it says that it keeps getting faster and faster until it catches up.
Well, that's fair
This
enough.
next
Then.
person asks why Polnareff had to use a wheelchair when he could have gotten robotic legs by contacting the Speedwagon Foundation. This person seems to pretty much forget Polnareff's entire role in Part 5, which is that he was in hiding from Passione
It was all
and was
secret,
explicitly said to be unable to contact Jotaro, so of course, doing this would be impossible. For a similar topic, people say that since Polnareff was unable to contact Jotaro, why is Koichi able to talk to him normally at the beginning of Part 5? Some also say that Passione was stopping all communication out of Italy. This question is kind of absurd since it was never said that Passione is halting all communication. Passione isn't halting communication, they're monitoring it. Polnareff was being targeted by Passione, and so if he was caught trying to contact someone outside of the country, they would locate him. Koichi is just a normal civilian who isn't being targeted. However, as Giorno said, he may be monitored, which is why he said to avoid mentioning Passione or the Arrow. This next question asks how it's possible that natural stand users like Avdol, Kakyo, and Ortonio exist, when it was shown that the Meteor is the source of all stands. I really don't see how this is a contradiction. The Meteor crashed on Earth tens of thousands of years ago, and all those people listed were born into a world that already had the Meteor and stand users on it. As we know, while stands aren't necessarily hereditary, stand potential is, and so stand user ancestors and people could be the cause of them naturally awakening stands. However, another answer is of course that the Meteor isn't the source of all stands like the comment claims, since that was never actually directly said by the manga. Like the arrow, the Meteor was physically drawn to Earth due to the stand potential of the people there. We already know that abilities like Hamon or vampirism exist independently of the Meteor.
Yep.
There's a common misconception that the virus from the Meteor is what creates stands. This isn't the case. The virus forces the body to evolve to survive, so for those that do gain a stand ability, they already had that latent potential in them, which the arrow drew out. If they were pushed enough by something other than the virus, they could awaken their stand that way as well. Before the Savage Garden arc in Part 6, Jolene tells the Speedwagon Foundation on the phone that her visitor rights were taken away, and so she would be unable to give them the disc that way. This commenter asks why Jolene didn't just have Hermes or FF use their visitor rights to hand over the disc. This comment is kind of odd, since immediately after saying this, they move on to the much more expedient plan of handing off the disc in the courtyard. Doing this let them recover the disc in the next 20 minutes, rather than waiting around for whatever the next visitor time would be.
It's like, get the plan done. Don't mess about with it.
Not to mention that the visitor center has already been shown to be a dangerous place to be, and it would be harder to hand off the disc while being directly watched by a guard as opposed to discreetly doing so using the pigeon. This next person asks how Dio became aware of the details of the Heaven Plan. Now, I have made a full video going over the Heaven Plan already, but I would like to cover some specific topics here. One idea people don't understand is how Dio knew the specific coordinates that had to be reached to obtain Made in Heaven. Like with a lot of things in the Heaven Plan, some JoJo fans just seem to dismiss the coordinates as random nonsense with no thought behind it. However, it was made extremely clear why this location was significant, which has to do with gravity. For the ability of Made in Heaven to come about, gravity had to be manipulated in a very specific way.
Because gravity and fate are meant to be the same, aren't they?
The forces of gravity are connected to time, so manipulating gravity can cause the acceleration of time that Pucci wanted. It was directly told to us that the location of the coordinates has a particularly low gravitational pull, which is why the Kennedy Space Center was built there in the first place, to more efficiently launch rockets. The phase of the moon was significant to the plan for the same reason. The new moon was when the gravitational pull from the moon was correct to allow the acceleration of time. Of course, Pucci circumvented this by floating to the correct coordinates even before the new moon had started. This next one is a two-part question. The first one asks how Pucci's idea of heaven makes sense, since he speeds up the world to create a new one where people have knowledge of their future, but the unnatural speeding up of the universe wouldn't actually give this effect. This is a misunderstanding of how Pucci's heaven would actually operate. Remember that Pucci could have stopped the acceleration of time at any point in the new world. The reason they returned to the prison in 2011 is solely because Pucci knew Emporio would be there so he could kill him. For some reason, people think that this specific time is otherwise significant, and that heaven would just be a loop of the short time from 2011 to 2012. So it doesn't matter that Pucci unnaturally accelerates time in 2012, since literally all people from the beginning of time up to that point will still exist in a world with knowledge of their future. Also remember that now that Pucci has Made in Heaven, he can even accelerate time at some point beyond 2012 and have even more people in the distant future be aware of their fate.
Yeah, they'll know what's going on.
The second part of the question goes on to say that it makes even less sense, since despite Emporio surviving and moving on to the new universe, he was never under the effects of heaven. This is simply not true. Emporio is directly shown to be aware of future events like the guard tripping, and is also shown of being unable to change fate by moving in another direction. And this was the entire reason that Emporio needed Pucci to insert the weather disc, because only Pucci was able to move freely of fate in this world. This next person asks why Pucci wanted to kill Emporio, when he was completely helpless and interfering with Emporio is the entire reason he lost. First of all, just because Emporio was not a direct danger to Pucci at the moment doesn't mean he wouldn't be in the future. Pucci directly says that Emporio would grow up one day and, like his allies, would be fated to oppose him. As for this leading to his defeat, Pucci had no clue that Emporio had the stand disc or that there was any way for Emporio to actually fight back against him. Lastly, Pucci doesn't really have to have a good reason for killing Emporio. He tries to kill him because he wants to. Really, it's the same as asking why Dio didn't just be good and live with a rich family.
Yeah, that's great.
Or why Kira didn't just give up his quiet life and flee Morio.
Yeah, like why
These
not?
are things that go against their character, and characters don't always act with perfect efficiency at all times. They have flaws and make mistakes or go otherwise out of their way to get what they want. This next one deals with the properties of Emporio crossing over into the new universe.
Okay.
A lot of people are confused about what can and can't be brought over. Some ask why Emporio was still able to have the stand disc when non-living things like his clothes are left behind. Others ask why Emporio and the others were shown to get new clothes when they arrived in the next universe. And some ask why Emporio didn't have access to his ghost gun after crossing over. Let's think about the properties of the reset for a moment. We're told that only living things cross over. However, I think you could very much consider the stand disc a living thing.
It's part
like
of
a fragment of a person's
Yeah.
soul, and while Weather
It's part of them, isn't it? So surely, yeah.
was dead, that doesn't stop the disc from continuing to exist. So I think it makes sense that it could be brought over,
Yeah.
unlike Emporio's clothes, which were erased. If you think about it like this, all those non-living things accelerated to the point of them completely disintegrating. The stand discs were shown to be indestructible and wouldn't disappear like this. Next is why they got new clothes. Well, since this is a copy of the previous world where everything is in the same place, Emporio's clothes would be in whatever location he was originally. That's why everyone wakes up with their clothes right next to them. And as for why Emporio couldn't use the ghost gun, I think there's two possible answers here. We don't actually know for sure if the ghost gun would be left behind, since he dropped it before we could learn that. It's possible that it could, since in JoJo I think we could actually consider ghosts or spirits to be living things in the same way the stand disc is. After all, the spirit is literally the life energy left behind after the body dies. However, if the gun is something that cannot be brought over, we still have to remember that in this case, if Emporio didn't have it on him at that time, he wouldn't be able to use it, so he would have to run to the ghost room to go find it. This next person asks why Dio was helping humanity by achieving heaven, when his goal prior to this was supposed to be ruling the world. This stems from a big misunderstanding of the heaven plan that Dio is somehow benevolent for wanting to achieve it. First of all, I don't think I have to point out that heaven is not a good thing for the vast majority of people. Pucci tells us that humanity could evolve to accept their fate completely and have peace of mind. However, that's simply hypothetical, and Pucci's will to reach heaven mainly stems from his trauma at the loss of Perla, and wanting to avoid the pain of that event. It's unlikely that humanity would ever truly reach peace of mind with heaven, since the natural state of humanity is not being a slave to fate. Also, despite what this person says, Dio never stopped wanting to rule the world, and wanting to achieve heaven doesn't conflict with this. The reason people are confused about this is because of the step in the heaven plan that involved the destruction of Dio's stand. However, you need to remember that the heaven plan as Dio envisioned it never actually happened. Dio had no intention of losing to Jotaro in Part 3, and this step would have been reached after Dio had prepared to absorb the souls of the 36 sinners. When he did this, his stand would absorb the souls during its destruction, and then evolve into one that would help him reach heaven. He didn't expect to die and have the plan be completely taken over by Pucci years later. Dio still intended to rule the world, but he also wanted to force everyone under him to know they are completely powerless with that outcome by being aware of their own fates.
Yeah, see what's happening,
This next question asks what the point of Jolene's sacrifice was when Pucci was still able to find Emporio in the next universe. However, the sacrifice was far from pointless, since the entire point was delaying Pucci so that Emporio could reach the next universe. If Jolene hadn't stayed behind to hold off Pucci, or for that matter, if any of the other main characters hadn't played their
Emporio wouldn't have been able to go there and stop him.
part, Emporio could have never reached the new world where he would be able to corner Pucci and defeat him. This next question deals with the new continuity, starting with Part 7. They ask why the Pillar Men never awakened in the new universe when they did in the original one. This person seems to have no understanding of the nature of the new universe. I shouldn't really have to point this out, but it is not a carbon copy of the original one. I've gone over before that the new universe starting with Steel Ball Run is not the same as the Irene universe from the end of Part 6.
Okay, yeah.
That universe does have the same history as the old one, just with changes made to the lives of the Part 6 characters and the future. Part 7 is the start of an entirely new continuity from a meta standpoint, with no real connection to anything prior other than homages to things from the original story. Just because something exists in the original story does not necessarily mean it has to exist here.
Right, okay.
One obvious example of this is all the new things that did not previously exist. There was no Steel Ball Run race in the original universe, and there were no walleyes or rock humans. So Pillarmen don't have to exist at all, and even if they did, nothing would indicate that they'd have to awaken at the same time. This person asks about the scene when John...
Wow, okay, let me just... Nope. 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 Boom. I like that last bit because then when I go into 7, it's more of an understanding of it is a completely fresh story. Just because when I was reading it, I was like, hey, there's Avdol. You know, Avdol was in it. And then, hey, there's a guy with Dio's name on his hat and everything. It's just like a completely retelling, but just homages to the characters from the original story. So, yeah, that was cool. We still got part 9, we still got part 10, and we still got part 11 to watch. And then anything else Hamon might drop. Get it. So we will check those out when we check them out. Thanks for watching.
Like and subscribe. Pixel Party Pals. Pixel Party Pals.